Anton Guinea was on. He talks about workplace and other stuff, but he is back from sunny Queensland, and he made me very jealous when he was telling me about the weather up there. Anton, good morning and welcome back.
Robert Cameron, great to be back. Been way too long. Thanks for having me. Can't wait to chat about what's going on in workplaces around Australia today.
And it is changing. We've had a few changes over COVID, of course, but there's a lot of interaction and issues in workplaces. I know wages are being talked about quite regularly. Wage inequality in the workplace. We do have men and women working shoulder to shoulder and finding out they're on different pay. That's very big in media and entertainment world, but it's probably other places in the workplace that you deal with. But since we last spoke, what's sort of been happening in that space to make it either better or worse?
Oh, look, I think probably the last 6 months hasn't seen a massive change. I think it's seen more of the same, and I think it's probably, if you had to ask me what the one issue still is, and it's still flexibility in the workplace, Robert Cameron, would you believe? Because people still now feel like they want to work from home and feel like they should have the option or the opportunity to do less time in an office-based environment. And even this week I've had conversations around people who are still quiet quitting or actually resigning from their employers because of that lack of flexibility. And so quiet quitting is the response to the lack of flexibility, but if you ask me what the one big issue was, it is still most employers that I know now, apart from, the really probably progressive ones, let's say progressive, are expecting people to be back in the office and working as they did pre-2020. So, it's taken 3 years. I'd say, in my estimation, between probably 70 and 90% of people, of employees and employers, are back to what we were 3 years ago. And so for the late adopters to a flexible workplace, they're sort of bucking the, no, they're probably normal because most people are trying to do that. But when it comes to being progressive, they're probably bucking the trend, and they're probably saying, no, we're not going to allow that flexibility. And what that results in is people being unhappy at work and not going the extra mile and doing this thing called quiet quitting, which is probably the buzzword of 2022, and it's probably still around in 2023.
Just explain exactly what that means. Are they leaving any form of work, or are they moving jobs to suit their new flexibility?
Oh, great. No, Robert, good question. Sorry, sometimes I forget that these words aren't out there everywhere. What quiet quitting is, it's a really interesting concept. Now, you imagine you've got a great staff, you've got, 50, 100 employees or whatever it is in your small business, or 1,000, and they're all going above and beyond, and it's 2020 now before COVID, and everyone's really working hard and going the extra mile, and they're willing to work back an hour or two at the end of the day, or they're willing to check their emails at night time, or they're willing to whatever to make sure that, and probably too much, I get that, to make sure the business succeeds. Now, what quiet quitting is saying, right, employer, if you're not willing to be flexible and give me some leeway to maybe work from home 1 day a week or 2 days a week, or my whole job, guess what? I'm not doing anything extra. Quiet quitting is like this whole stamping your foot and saying, you know what? No more extra hours. I'm there at 9 and I'm gone at 5. And by the way, don't ask me to do anything outside my job scope. Don't ask me to do any extra time. Don't ask me to check emails after hours. Do not text me after hours, because I am doing the bare minimum. So that's what quiet quitting is. It's going from being, someone who's pretty committed to the organisation, who's willing to go the extra mile, to someone who's certainly not, who's not willing to do anything extra because of, I guess, the perceived inflexibility of the employer generally.
Now, there's lots of variables, and you've added a few more, because there's good employers who read the tea leaves well, and they know their staff, and they measure productivity. Cool. What has certainly happened during this period of time is that some employees are found to be much more productive at home. They don't have the stress of getting up early, getting ready, looking after kids. Their job might be pure data entry type role, which can be done from home easily, and they're being much more productive in less time, so the boss is still happy. They're happier people anyway. They've got a better life at home, and they're reluctant to change. And their boss is probably saying, well, we don't want you in here because sometimes you come in here, you get distracted, you don't get your work done properly. So we'd prefer you at home being productive. Someone else in that same workplace says, well, hang on a minute, Sally and Bill are staying home, why can't I? Well, the boss says, well, when you're at home, you don't do anything. When you're in here, at least I can keep an eye on you. There's all these variables that must make it really tough.
Oh, there is, Robert, and we're all so different as humans, right? And you know what? What about the people that don't want to work from home because they know they're just, you know, they've got kids or they're distracted or whatever?
I know I wouldn't. I would not be a productive person at home, left to my own devices. I need to be in an environment where I'm pushed and pulled to be productive. I know that. That's just the way I'm geared.
Yeah, that's right, and that's a bit of self-awareness, right? And you know, and a lot of people are self-aware enough to know what they want, and that's the thing. But there's no one-size-fits-all, and that's why I feel for employers, of which I am one, and we've got a very flexible arrangement. We've only got a small team of 5, but, you know, one I've never seen in our office. The others are sort of 1 or 2 days a week out of 4 or 5. So, you know, and then we can talk about the, you know, employers just putting a, like you say, blanket rule out there, which is really uncool. But again, it comes down to the individual, and I think you're right. I think you've touched on something really important. It's got to be individualised, and I think that is probably the thing that really would challenge employers, because they just, you know, it's really easy in an employment contract just to do a sort of a carte blanche and one size fits all. But when we've got to individualise it, which I think we should, because if there's someone that can work from home and wants to, but then the next person says, well, I can too. Well, I think you've sort of got to really take all that into account as an employer. And an employer's life's not easy. Leadership can be lonely, but these are the big decisions that employers and leaders, as you and I know, leaders need to make, because the better decisions leaders make, the more people focus, the better results they're going to get. And like you said before, there's a whole lot of great research out there to say that some roles, some humans, some employees are really, really, really highly functioning at home, in a home environment, home office environment.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the case. Now, I've heard issues around different industries, government industries. There seems to be a situation where a lot of local government entities are very empty in the office because people are saying, no, we're working from home and that's it. And there's nothing that seems to be able to be done about that. Others want to come into the office and do so. And it just seems to be it's splitting the workforce within a particular environment, but that environment varies from industry to industry. Are you finding that across your coverage?
Oh, 100%, Robert. Every industry, every business, you know, every employer is sort of taking a different approach to this at the moment. And I don't know how you regulate this. This is too big, and I think it has to be by employer. But I'll tell you what the big change for me is going to be. Late last year, probably September or October, and you and I have talked about this particular topic of psychological safety. So psych safety is now, when we talked about it last, it was more a concept or a theory or a theoretical framework of how we could protect employees' mental well-being and their psychological safety at work. It's now law. Since you and I spoke, there is a guideline, there's a rule book, a playbook that's been legislated, it's statutory now, that we must protect people's psychological safety. Now, I've got a strange feeling that law, that statute, will somehow influence it. I don't know what it looks like yet because we're still in the early days and no one would be able to comply with this psychological safety guideline yet because it's new and there's a whole range of requirements around it. Some you know, good employers, good leaders probably did naturally, but I think there's still a fair way to go for most employers and most workplaces. But I think I actually feel like that legislation is going to be the thing that gets linked to how we control flexibility, how we manage flexibility in the workplace. And I think there's going to be a bit around, it's not just going to be a bit around can you do your job, but it's going to be a bit around work-life balance and can you stay, you know, emotionally right if you're coming in all these days, or is there an opportunity for you to feel emotionally better if you get 4-day work weeks, for example? You know, and that's the thing at the moment where organisations are trialling. So I really feel like this psych safety stuff's going to play into the flexibility in the workplace would be my guess.
It's an area I know you talked about a lot with me, and that is mental health issues in the workplace, and heard a disturbing report coming in this morning about the pressures of the workplace payment situation, and suggesting that there's going to be withdrawals for payments around bullying-related incidents in the workplace for employees. That could create a little bit of a problem, just purely because the financial inability of workplace
employees.
I've had a mental block as to what the workplace payment system's called, but work cover payments being withheld in certain areas around the area of mental health. That's going to put some pressure on.
Oh, mate, big time. And that's what I mean about this psych safety guideline. And as you've just mentioned, that's just one of the issues. How do we compensate? How do we compensate employees for the mental harm and the mental anguish caused by their colleagues or their leaders? And then, how do you then remediate that in the workplace to make sure that never happens again? How do you then protect this employee into the future, and how do you look after them long term? Because some of these incidents, Robert, as you and I both know, working in an organisation for a poor leader that hurts you emotionally or psychologically cannot just be an acute outcome. It can have a chronic effect. It can have long-term consequences. Here's an example. We do our leadership training workshops, and I'll ask people, were you ever hurt by a poor leader? Yep. How long ago? 30 years.
Yeah.
People remember this stuff, right? And so, how do we compensate? How do we protect? How do we stop it from happening in the first place is the big question. But remembering that you're not going to stop every case, and things like bullying and those sorts of things are really subjective, and they're what's bullying to me is not bullying to you. So, and bullying's an interesting one because it's continuous. It's not just a once-off event. It's more longer term, and it's usually when someone has said, "Hey, I'm uncomfortable with this," but the behaviour continues, and so it's going to be really tough to mandate. So I think psych safety is going to, and I'm all for it. I think psych safety is a really cool thing to bring into the 2023 workplace, because we're obviously in a period now where we know about diagnoses, and we know that people struggle, and we know that people are struggling after COVID, and I feel like as employers, I feel really responsible for the mental health of my staff, and I hope all leaders feel the same way. And so anything that can help us do that. That's not saying it's easy for leaders. There'll be some leaders listening to this, Robert, going, "Oh, Anton, seriously, man, this is just more work, more effort, more cost, more time." People having time off now. What, they want to work 4-day weeks? What? How am I going to get anything done? So I get there's leaders out there listening to this, sort of furrowing their brow, and at the same time, just think about the good that we're doing on the planet by looking after all of our mental health a little bit better.
Yeah, well, that's a key issue, and an issue I wanted to talk to you about as well is those issues in the workplace around bullying, and sometimes it can be just around conversation. It can be political, religious views. They've been there for quite a while, but there's a big one at the moment, and that is the voice. The voice referendum is going to come up. It's not just now an opinion. You actually have to line up and deliver your opinion in the form of a vote. And some of the conversation around that, I imagine, is tense, because what we're seeing played out on our television screens, and I saw another one this morning, the deputy leader of the former deputy leader, Tanya Plibersek, and former leader of the Nationals, Barnaby Joyce, having the most childish spat over this particular subject, played out on a highly watched television show of a morning. That is going to continue on into a workplace, and it's going to cause tension and put people under pressure. Are these sorts of things the types of, are they avoidable in a workplace to put a ban on that sort of conversation to stop tension?
Yeah, you're right. There is some tension around it, especially from our Indigenous brothers and sisters who feel like they'd like a voice, because at the end of the day, you got to remember, right, as you and I both know, and some people out there might not, we are going to vote on a constitutional change. That is a big deal. Do we give, our traditional owners and our Indigenous cultures, I guess, a part of our constitution, which they haven't had before, and have this voice in Parliament? That's a massive, massive deal. And coming back to your point, is it insightful at the moment in workplaces? And the answer is is probably not as much yet as it's going to be. I think as it gets closer, as the energy ramps up, it will be more. But the people that have talked to me about it are the people who are Indigenous generally, and actually obviously highly support the bill, and hopefully it gets through. But I think there's probably in workplaces there's going to be more debate. There's not, in my experience, there's probably not too much yet, only at leader level. But I think it's coming. So I think you're 100% right. You've sort of forecasted a little sort of bow wave that we haven't quite seen yet, till it gets a little bit more serious. We're only seeing it at sort of parliament level and childish behaviour by our politicians, sadly, who are there, who we've elected to represent us. But I think it's only a matter of time, around referendum time, when that sort of, or like it's at a vote, like a voting time when there's a bit of energy around. So I think we'll see it more and more soon. But I just don't know whether Australians really realise how big this is. This is a really, 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 really big deal that we're voting on. So I think we should all take it that seriously. In my opinion, and I might be wrong. I just feel like we're rewriting something that we wrote a couple of hundred years ago, and I think it's great. I think let's get the voice of Parliament through, and do we really need a referendum even there for you?
Yeah, well, of course, by the law of the land, we do, being a constitutional change, but with one side of politics which represents just about, let's say, a third of the voting populace will either vote Liberal or National. Both of those parties have come out and said, we're going to campaign no. So immediately there's division straight away along political lines. And we do encourage people always here, and I keep saying it, I don't care who you vote for, just make sure you know why you're doing it. And I think in this particular case with the referendum, it's very important to read a lot, different views, educate yourself, and make sure that when the time comes, when the referendum comes around, you're voting with your conscience, not someone else's opinion that's been picked up by you and left. So I really stress that even more so now. Do your own research, and also try and keep the debates out of the workplace or other areas. You can have them in certain places, Anton, but sometimes a workplace is probably not a place to put a strong opinion, and particularly it's not a good place to condemn someone else's. Correct.
And I think, and that's it. Oh, mate, everything you just said then, mate, I hope you recorded that, Robert Cameron, because that was just gold, mate, what you just said then, seriously. Vote based on your conscience, not on someone else's opinion, please. Please keep singing that tune. And you're right, the workplace isn't a place for some of these discussions. The problem is, here's the problem. I think Australians were guilty of this, Robert, and this would be my big, comment on this, is that Australians, in my opinion, aren't very accepting of other people's beliefs, right? What I mean by that is, we are challenged when someone's different to ourselves, when they're different to us, when they dress differently, when they identify differently. Like there's races and there's gender topics and all this other stuff around at the moment. And it's not about agreeing with people. So I say to your listeners, and the agreement piece is the most important piece, because we don't have to agree. We just have to accept that someone else might have a different opinion based on the research that they've done, based on their upbringing, based on their conditioning, based on whatever it is, and that's okay. It is okay if someone has a different belief to us, and we don't have to try and tear them down and change their belief system, because here's the thing, we probably won't change their belief system, so it's easier to have a conversation around it rather than a debate or an argument. Just say, hey, and here's the thing, this would be my tip for your listeners, be interested, not interesting. Just say, hey, what do you feel like you do about this? Talk me through it. What's your experience? It was like the, and I'll just whisper this so no one hears it, but it was like the vaccine, right? Everyone's got so passionate about it instead of actually understanding where people were coming from. Some people had, children that had been vaccinated and that were impacted by this. So, there's some real rationale on both sides, and we've all got experience that matters, and we've all got experience that we're not going to be swayed on, and people have got their beliefs. I'm not going to change someone's identity or how they identify just because of one conversation. What I want to do is understand why. To talk me through it. Tell me about yourself. Help me understand where you're coming from, and then I can be a little bit more accepting. But I just feel like we try to change people's opinions in Australia, and we try to sway their viewpoint instead of just saying, hey, tell me about it, let's talk through it.
Yeah, perception is reality is my favourite favourite saying. And once I understood what that really meant, that if someone has a different view, they're not a deal or stupid.
That's right.
I understand. Well, why do you hold that view? And when you question, you can have a really good conversation. Anton, I'm a little bit excited about the future and optimistic because you're a bit younger than me, but I think both my vintage and yours probably fit the criteria you mentioned earlier, being scared of change and scared of difference. I reckon our teenagers and even youngsters in their 20s are now really much better at this than we are, particularly teenagers. I think they're in school environments because they know... See, I was 15 or 16 years of age before I met anyone of a different nationality. Nowadays, kids at 2 years of age are engaging with different coloured skins and different nationalities, and by the time they get to teenagers, nothing concerns them.
Normalised.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's normalised the whole thing, which is really good.
Oh, mate, I'm with you, man. I'm with you, Robert. You know, like my boys are early 20s, and they've got, obviously, young ladies in their lives now who are both early 20s too. And they're so much more open-minded than we ever were, so much more accepting than we ever were. They have such different conversations than we ever had. And, you know, and I just love seeing it that, you know, society has come so far when you think about it. So I'm now 50. I've hit the halfway point, and you're young. I was going to say you're younger than I am.
I'm a young 65.
Good on you, mate. Good on you. But, you know, you think how far it's taken to get to this point where we're saying now 20-year-olds have got this. So I wonder whether it's... So by the time they're our age, right, which let's say it's another 25 years, you know, they'll get to 50 or 60 and have this really open mindset about life, and the next generation coming through will be the same. Does that mean we've still got 20 or 30 years of, I guess, a struggle with these conversations that we're having about race and about identity and about, you know, all these other things where people are a little bit different to ourselves, and so, or religion even. So yeah, I just wonder. So in answer to your question, 100%, the youngsters of today are so much better and so much more open than we ever were. You got to remember, you and I were raised in the 1900s, man.
That's right.
The 1900s.
Long time ago.
You know, like you said, you were a teenager. I'd never met someone of a different identity, you know, from a sexual identity until probably later than that, right? So when you're in a regional community, you're just not in the 1900s. You just weren't exposed to, I guess, people very different to yourself, and it's been a journey for us. And you and I have lent into it, but don't worry, Robert. There's still people at our age, as you know, that haven't, you know, that are still very closed-minded, let's say. Old school thinking, and that's up to them too. That's their call as well. You and I will accept them, and we'll go, you know what, that's cool. We're going to do it differently. You know, you and I are going to say, you know what, everyone's different. Let's embrace, let's accept, let's engage, let's be interested, and let's understand. And there is a small pocket of our community, and I've got mates in this category, mate. I'm telling you. I sometimes get phone calls after I do interviews like this, or if I put stuff out on social media from my buddies and say, this is a true story. Mate, what are you doing out there supporting all of that stuff? True story, I kid you not.
Positive, a way to finish, open one's mind and embrace other thoughts, and that's a good way to finish. Anton Guinea, thank you so much again for your time. We've run out. We do have this on tape, so if you do want to pull some gems, you have my permission. More than happy. Beautiful. And Australia's best interviewer, Robert Cameron, thanks for having me on. Good on you, mate. You are too kind. Best wishes till next time. Hopefully it won't be as long. You too, mate. Hope you had a great Easter. See you, mate. Anton Guinea joining us for a chat about stuff in the workplace, and workplaces are different, and you might be listening this morning having a day off today but thinking that tomorrow it's back to work, and it may be a happier workplace these days. There may be tension in there, and you may be going through this change, and there is change. There's the work from home syndrome. There is the 4-day working week being trialled in some areas. It sounds really, really good, and I've always thought 4 10-hour days would be probably better than 5 8s if for balance of life. It's just whether your workplace can accommodate that or not. But it's an interesting time. Change is afoot.